361, End of the Game. Chapter 360, The End of the Tournament. When Fleur swam off without looking back, the merperson gave a disappointed little frown. Then it saw Harry approaching, and its whole face lit up. "Hello," it bubbled. The merperson, Gistbird as he later introduced himself, grinned, showing sharp teeth, and greeted Harry in English with enthusiastic, gurgling speech. "Are you a champion too?" Harry loosened his grip on his wand and answered in Murmish. "Hello." Gist's eyes widened in surprise when Harry used the tribe's language. "You speak our language?" he asked in English, the words bubbling oddly. Harry nodded, speaking haltingly in imperfect Murmish. "Just a little." Murmish was strange and unlike any land tongue, harsh and jagged on the surface, like screams and catcalls, but when heard underwater, it softened into a flowing song. Gist, delighted, flicked his tail and chattered. "Our language is simple, but English is much harder. I've been learning for a long time. I've lived in this lake since I was small. Do you know what that means? I want to see the world above, so I study English. Your headmaster gave me the chance." He rambled on in Murmish, words tumbling like a melody. Harry stood there awkwardly. He hadn't understood most of it. You couldn't expect a beginner in Murmish to follow such a long speech. He would have liked to stay and talk. The merperson seemed sincere and curious, but there was the task to think of. "I still have the competition," he cut in. "I need to go." Gist paused, then a look of understanding spread across his face as he patted his smooth, scaly head. "Ah, right, the champion's task." He pointed deeper into the lake. "That way, to the glowing place. The hostage is there." "Hostage?" The word made Harry sit up straight. "Here." He peered toward the direction the merperson pointed and made out, far off, a faint blue glow. The Mur village. "Thank you," Harry said, nodding. Gist flashed him a toothy grin and in English called, "Good luck, Harry Potter." "You know my name?" Harry asked, surprised, but Gist had already flicked his tail and sped away. Not long after, Harry reached the Mer people's village. It was larger than he'd imagined. Rough stone houses dotted about, some covered with glowing algae and water plants. Visibility was remarkably good. He'd only ever observed from a distance before, for fear that armed Mer people might take him for an intruder. Now, as he swam through, residents peered out from their homes and stared at him like something new and odd. Bits of Murmish drifted to him that he could just make out, words like ugly and human. It felt unfriendly. Turning a corner, he came upon the place intended for the task. A broad courtyard where a group of Mer people sang in unison. Their song, song-like and mournful, meant roughly, "Champions, we are here," easy enough to follow. Behind them stood a large statue of a merperson, clearly an honored figure in their tribe. 4 ropes extended from the statue's tail, and at the end of each rope were tied people: Ron, Hermione, Gabrielle Delacour, and someone who made Harry's heart clench, Cho Chang. At last he understood Ludo Bagman's treasure and Gist's hostage. The task was to bring these 4 treasures ashore. Why Ron was Harry's particular treasure puzzled him. Fleur arrived then, having apparently lost her way a little and fallen behind. She swam up beside Harry and waved. He jerked his eyes to the statue and mouthed the names to her. "Gabrielle!" she cried, voice muffled by the bubblehead charm but urgent. "They're fine," Harry reassured her. "They're well protected. Our job is to bring them to shore. I can show you." He went first. With a quick flick of his wand, he cast a severing charm at the rope tying Ron. The rope fell apart with almost no resistance. "I'm going first," he told Fleur, then tapped the remaining length of the rope that hung from the statue toward Ron. The rope at once transformed, twisting into a whirring propeller that spun rapidly and lifted Ron upward, carrying him toward the surface in an instant. Fleur stared, baffled and a little dumbstruck. How was she supposed to learn from that? When Harry broke the surface of the Black Lake, the stadium erupted. Rooftops echoed with a deafening cheer. "Harry Potter! He did it! First place!" Harry let out a breath. It seemed he really was the first to finish. Everyone in the stands had seen his performance replayed on the screens, his talk with the merperson and those final elegant spells, and it had looked flawless. Vincent watched with satisfaction. This Harry was already, by any reasonable measure, an excellent wizard. On the shore, Ron was unceremoniously flung onto the bank, the propeller rope dropping him with a thud. That wasn't exactly how you treated a treasure. Harry had intended to be gentler, but the rope had seemed to have a will of its own. Ron woke as he hit air and sat up, blinking and confused. Fleur surfaced with Gabrielle close behind, hair plastered to her cheeks and eyes bright with relief. Perhaps her bubblehead charm had faltered at the last moment. Cedric and Crumb hauled their charges up almost simultaneously, and with that the task was over. "So, why were you at the bottom of the lake, Ron?" Harry asked once they were all on shore. Ron scratched his head. "Last night, Professor Dumbledore asked if I'd be willing to help you in the tournament." "You agreed?" Harry said. "Sort of," Ron said slowly. "The moment I nodded, I passed out. They didn't tell me anything." Gabrielle sat nearby smiling. Dumbledore had apparently made the same request of her and told her what was happening. The only difference, Ron added with a rueful glance at Gabrielle, was that Dumbledore had been much gentler when he dealt with her. Chapter 361, Ron and Malfoy. The second task of the Triwizard Tournament had come to an end. For Harry it had felt almost anticlimactic, far too easy compared to the dragon from the first task. This time he only had to retrieve someone from the depths of the Black Lake. The final scores confirmed it. He'd taken first place again without suspense. There were 2 fewer judges this time, which, if anything, made the scoring fairer. One of the missing judges had always been particularly harsh on Harry. It was February 24th, the morning after the task. Ron paced anxiously around the common room, wearing a visible path into the carpet. Hermione finally had enough. "Aren't you ready to face Malfoy?" she asked, exasperated. "You've learned loads of spells, and Harry's taught you plenty of dueling moves. There's nothing to worry about." "I know." Ron shot her a tense look. He and Hermione still had some little friction between them, but this wasn't the time to argue. The duel with Malfoy mattered most. He'd sent the challenge himself. It would be mortifying to lose. He'd once talked grandly about dueling Malfoy in front of the whole school, but that was impossible. Student duels were forbidden and would cost Gryffindor a fortune in points, so they'd changed the plan. The duel would be held in their usual secret spot, but this time it would be recorded. If Ron lost, Malfoy would certainly try to broadcast the tape everywhere. "Don't be nervous, Ron," Harry said, lounging backward in an armchair, chin on the backrest. "Just keep your wand steady and your spells clear like we practiced. If you stick to your rhythm, you've got a fair chance." Ron relaxed a little, but when Harry added a figure, 30%, his face fell again. "Maybe you could have given me a bit more confidence," he grumbled. Harry shrugged. Confidence wasn't given away. He'd worked for what encouragement he offered. Ron had improved noticeably during their special training. If he followed the plan, he'd be fine. Harry suddenly realized he hadn't seen Malfoy around school in days, not even at yesterday's task. That evening, as Colin Creevey was heading to the Great Hall, Harry stepped out of a side corridor to catch him. "Colin, wait a moment." Harry lowered his voice and pulled him into an empty corner. "What is it?" Colin blinked. It wasn't every day Harry Potter sought him out. "I need your help. Do you have anything that can record video? Like a camera?" Colin's face lit up. "Yes, of course." He fumbled in his pocket and produced a scratched crystal ball. "I found this in a second-hand shop in Diagon Alley. The shopkeeper said it was an old interrogation recorder. The storage was broken, and the video didn't work." "So it's useless?" Harry asked. "Not anymore." Colin grinned and handed over the crystal ball. "I looked up what it was in the library and fixed the video function." Harry turned the lightweight globe in his hands. Thin silver filaments drifted inside it, clearly a magical device, intricately made. Colin could repair something like this? Harry had to admit it impressed him. "Can I borrow it for a bit?" he asked. "Of course," Colin beamed. "It's a little tricky to use, though. I can help you operate it." "Come with us, then," Harry said. Colin punched the air in delight. "That's great. I'd be honored." After dinner, Colin slipped out with Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Night had fallen, moonlight frosting the lawns. Colin clutched the crystal ball and slowed, nervous. The plan felt borderline rule-breaking. "Why did you bring Creevey?" Hermione asked, annoyed. "We need a cameraman," Harry said succinctly. Ron didn't speak. He tapped his wand against his palm and muttered spells under his breath, alternately wishing Malfoy would back out and fearing he'd arrive flanked by the entire Slytherin Quidditch team. They reached a wide clearing at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Colin shivered at the shadowed trees. "We're not going in, are we?" he whispered. "No." Harry pointed to the clearing. "We'll wait here." Colin relaxed, but then peered nervously into the darkness. "Are we going to?" "Ron is dueling Malfoy," Harry said in a low voice. "We need you to record the whole thing." Colin's awe and excitement instantly replaced his fear. "Oh my, this is huge! A Gryffindor and a Slytherin duel." "Quiet, Colin." Hermione's frown was sharp. "You sound like Rita Skeeter." "Sorry." He shut up immediately. The Forbidden Forest was quiet save for wind in the leaves and a distant owl. They waited. Ron paced, wand in hand, rehearsing spells aloud. Hermione leaned against an old oak, scanning the tree line. Wild creatures sometimes wandered out of the forest at night. "It looks like Malfoy and his lot are late," Harry observed. "He's not going to show, is he?" Ron asked, part hopeful, part anxious. Before Harry could answer, there was a rustle from the forest's edge. Everyone turned toward the sound. Finally, came a voice from the shadows. "I thought you'd chickened out, Weasley." Chapter 362, The Peculiar Malfoy. Malfoy staggered out of the shadows. To Harry's surprise, Crabbe and Goyle were not with him. Odd, since Harry had seen them sitting in the stands only yesterday. Hermione had noticed it too. "Malfoy," she said coldly, "where are your two cronies?" "My business has nothing to do with them, mudblood." Malfoy spat the insult without emotion. Ron's face flamed and his fists clenched, but Hermione put a hand on his arm to hold him back. Her gaze stayed calm, only narrowing slightly. "He doesn't seem right," she whispered to Harry. Harry nodded. Malfoy did look off, paler than usual, with a sickly green-gray cast. He looked utterly drained, like Ron after 2 consecutive all-nighters of homework. "Hurry up and start, Weasley," Malfoy said, his voice hoarse, the usual arrogance replaced by a tired impatience. "I don't have time to stand here listening to your nonsense." Even Ron, usually slow to pick up on things, could see Malfoy wasn't well. For a moment, Ron's chest filled with hope. If Malfoy was weak, his chances of winning were better. His eyes brightened, and a vicious smile tugged at his lips. He would not show mercy. He turned to Colin Creevey and made a point of speaking loudly. "Colin, record this properly. Today's a rare chance. I want everyone to see Malfoy get beaten." Colin fumbled with the crystal ball in his hands. A faint red glow spread through it, and he nodded at Ron. "It's ready. It'll record everything. Let's begin." Ron squared up, wand at the ready, determination written all over him. Malfoy gripped his wand. "No matter how many times we do this, the outcome will be the same, Weasley. You're just making a fool of yourself." In his eyes, Ron was nothing, just a Weasley. "You lose, Malfoy," Ron replied. The duel lasted about 10 minutes. When it ended, Malfoy lay disarmed and sprawled on the ground, his robes in tatters. Ron's robes were damaged too, but Malfoy was clearly worse off. After a final hit sent him flying, Ron stood victorious. "Well done, Ron," Harry cheered from the sidelines. His pride at Ron's win felt better than any personal victory. Ron hadn't done anything extraordinary, but he'd improved a lot since the last time. Malfoy's words were as venomous as ever, but tonight he seemed dazed. Ron had seized an opening and taken it. "Colin, did you get it?" Ron asked, grinning. "All of it, including your brilliant Expelliarmus at the end." Colin waved the crystal ball excitedly. "Just put your eye to the ball, and you'll see everything." Explosive charm. Malfoy sprang up with a sudden movement. A blinding red flash erupted from his spare wand. The crystal ball in Colin's hands shattered into a spray of glittering fragments. Shards scattered across the ground, and Colin stood frozen, staring at the ruined remains of his prize. A dismal, desolate cry ripped through the night. "Malfoy!" Ron roared, raising his wand again, but Malfoy had already scrambled back to the edge of the Forbidden Forest. He breathed heavily, but his wand remained trained on the 3 of them. "You think I'd let you carry that around, showing it off?" His voice was broken, but hard as steel. "Weasley, lucky dog." Seeing Malfoy ready to flee, Harry and Hermione cast together. Hermione's Expelliarmus grazed Malfoy's cheek and struck the tree trunk behind him, leaving a charred mark. Harry's severing charm hit, only it tore Malfoy's clothing. The fabric resisted in a way that suggested a defensive enchantment. Then everyone froze. As the torn cloth fell away, a hideous mark on Malfoy's forearm flared with an eerie green light. The dark mark. Harry felt his scar throb with sudden cold pain. This was not an illusion. You, Ron choked, unable to get the words out. He stared at the mark in horror. Malfoy's pupils pinched down at the exposure. He backed up until his spine hit a thick oak. "You don't understand," he rasped, one hand clutching his arm. "Get him," he croaked. Harry decided at once. Malfoy couldn't take on 3 opponents. Colin was still on his knees, staring at the crystal ball fragments, muttering, "My crystal ball." Malfoy apparated, vanishing into the trees before the other's spells could reach him. As Malfoy disappeared, Ron turned to Harry, utterly bewildered. "What do we do?" he asked, the earlier triumph wiped from his face. The duel no longer mattered. The reality of the dark mark overshadowed everything. "We have to tell Dumbledore," Harry said hoarsely, staring down the path Malfoy had taken. Hermione was already kneeling beside the crystal ball shards. She tapped them with her wand. "Reparo!" The pieces trembled and then crumbled to ash. "It's no use," she said. Colin's voice was small and despairing. "It can't be fixed. The recording's gone too." "I'll buy you a new one," Harry told him, before turning to the others. "You two go and tell Dumbledore or Professor Vincent. Malfoy is a Death Eater. I'm going after him into the Forbidden Forest." Ron opened his mouth to argue, but Hermione cut him off. "Be careful, Harry," she said. "We'll need about 10 minutes." Harry nodded and, without another word, went after Malfoy into the trees. Hermione knew sending Harry was the most sensible choice. He was the strongest magically and far less likely to be harmed by whatever lurked in the forest. If Malfoy could be subdued, Harry was the one to do it. "Go," Hermione said, and she and Ron ran off toward the castle. "Let's find Professor Vincent." "Why not Dumbledore?" Ron asked as they hurried away. Hermione shot him a sharp look. "There's no time to climb 8 flights of stairs." Chapter 363, Compulsion. Malfoy ran blindly through the Forbidden Forest. "Damn it," he swore, clutching at the dark mark on his arm. His face was ashen, his steps uneven, cold sweat soaking the back of his robe. After cutting through a stand of dead trees, he realized he had lost his way. He sank against a great trunk and panted, glancing again at his skin. The skull with the snake tongue writhed and warped as if trying to break free from flesh. A hopelessness like a plunge into a bottomless pit closed over him. He had believed in pure blood superiority, but that didn't mean he wanted to follow Lord Voldemort or learn the dark arts. People who stood with Voldemort did not end well, he was sure of it. Voldemort hadn't properly returned yet. The mark could only mean danger. He had just been branded by Voldemort, by someone else's body, controlled, and the thought turned his stomach. The reason why? Malfoy? A familiar voice cut through the trees. He looked up to find a great trunk moving where no tree should. No, this was not a tree. It was a traint, and perched on its shoulder was a man, Professor Vincent, with the traint butt beneath him. Malfoy's hand flew to his torn sleeve, pulling it down over the mark. He went paler and sweat beaded on his forehead. "Professor?" he stammered, eyes flicking nervously around. "I was just out for a walk." Vincent looked up at the black sky and then at the shadowed forest. His mouth twitched. Going for a nocturnal stroll in the Forbidden Forest, an odd pastime. He had indeed been out, though walking was generous. He'd been sitting on Butt's shoulder, and Butt had fashioned a soft, leafy backrest for him. He had found Malfoy by following the devil's snare. It had grown restless, warning of danger. "Not the smartest choice, Mr. Malfoy," Vincent said, frowning at the disheveled boy. "What are you hiding under your sleeve? Are you hurt?" Vincent dropped lightly from Butt's shoulder and walked toward him. Malfoy sidestepped and kept his distance. Butt stooped, his huge tree face tilting close. "Little one," the Trent rumbled, "you carry a rotten smell." "Don't frighten him, Butt." Vincent raised a hand to pull Butt back, then fixed his gaze on Malfoy's clutched left arm. "What are you hiding, Mr. Malfoy?" Malfoy's pupils shrank, and he fell silent. When he wouldn't answer, Vincent gave a small sweep of his wand. The remaining length of Malfoy's torn sleeve shredded as if seized by an invisible hand, exposing the mark beneath. Under the moonlight, the skull and snake pulsed an eerie green, the lines writhing under skin like something alive. Vincent's face tightened. It was the dark mark, and it was active. Malfoy lunged to hide it, but it was too late. Vincent had already seen. He heard, in the back of his mind, why the devil's snare had been alarmed. "Calm down," Vincent said, voice steady. "For now we'll worry about your late-night jaunt later. Tell me where you got that dark mark." He produced a small phial of sedative potion and held it out. Malfoy didn't take it. His voice was flat, defeated. It's nothing to do with you. I just like the design. It's not a dark mark. Vincent sighed inwardly at the lie. Joining the Death Eaters right now would be a terrible decision, he murmured as if to himself. Only fools would do something like that. What do you think, Mr. Malfoy? Malfoy's lips trembled. Fear glinted in his eyes. I was forced, he broke out at last, the words raw and hoarse. So you don't want to be a Death Eater? Vincent said, narrowing his eyes. Malfoy lowered his head. No, I don't. Perhaps, he thought, Malfoy might have once nursed a childish, dangerous curiosity about power, but whatever fantasy he'd had burst. Vincent suspected Voldemort had forced the mark on the boy. Why he would go to such lengths for a mere Malfoy was puzzling. Compelling a child to bear the mark was not the move of a sensible strategist. Still, the mark was there, and it was a channel. If Malfoy spoke without caution, Voldemort might learn everything. Prudence, Vincent knew, was essential. Why would Voldemort brand you? Vincent asked again, voice sharpened. This never used to happen. Malfoy's face closed like a door. I can't tell you, he said shortly, glancing at the mark as if it might hear him. Vincent nodded. There was some reason Malfoy could not speak that he had to keep to himself. And if I could remove it, Vincent continued slowly, would you let me? Nod for yes, shake your head for no. Malfoy thought for a long beat, then gave a small, desperate nod. Vincent allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Removing the dark mark would be, in effect, cutting a boy loose from Voldemort, an unforgivable betrayal in the Dark Lord's eyes. For Malfoy to accept that risk suggested there were forces behind him beyond a childish whim. The Malfoys were not simple loyalists, and Draco's willingness to gamble his life suggested deeper reasons still. Chapter 364, Removing the Dark Mark. The Dark Mark was a spell that attacked both soul and body. It was, undeniably, a clever piece of magic. If it had been someone else's mark, Vincent wouldn't have been confident in removing it, but Malfoy's case was different. His mark was fresh, brand new. That meant Vincent had a chance to purge it with a purification potion. Just as Vincent was about to begin, a shaft of light cut through the trees and fell across them. Found him! A familiar, sharp voice rang out. Malfoy trembled from head to toe. The expression on his face was pure terror. His worst fear had come true. Vincent turned, and almost at once, a small figure pushed through the undergrowth, the bushes parting to let him through. Professor Flitwick? Vincent raised an eyebrow. The Forbidden Forest was unusually busy today. Flitwick, the charms professor, rarely came this deep into the trees. He was clearly looking for Malfoy. Flitwick hurried over, out of breath. Oh, you found Malfoy first, did you? That's a relief. I must inform Professor Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall. He flicked his wand, murmured the charm, and a white mist poured from its tip, coalescing into a Patronus, a huge silver bear with unexpectedly ape-like fangs. It shook its plush fur and nuzzled Flitwick's hand with an almost affectionate motion. Go and tell Professor Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall that Malfoy has been located, Flitwick said quietly. The silver bear bobbed its head and bounded away, easily melting into the forest. Vincent watched, intrigued. He had never seen Flitwick's Patronus before and hadn't expected such a majestic creature. When Flitwick reached them, his gaze fell on Malfoy and the dark mark. He shuddered. Mr. Malfoy, are you a Death Eater? Malfoy didn't dare meet anyone's eyes. He stayed silent. Let Dumbledore arrive first, Vincent told Flitwick. Don't frighten him. This frightened me half to death, Flitwick admitted. A few minutes later, Dumbledore arrived with several other professors. Hagrid and Harry were there as well. Harry must have been the first to notice Malfoy's condition. After a short explanation, Dumbledore led Malfoy, a few others, and Vincent back to the headmaster's office. Harry explained what he had seen to Dumbledore and Vincent, tactfully leaving out any mention of a duel. Malfoy was not in any state to correct him. It's only a mark, Snape said brusquely. That doesn't mean he's joined the Death Eaters. You are different, Severus, Dumbledore replied calmly. And the point now is that Mr. Malfoy didn't have this mark a few months ago. Snape fell silent. Vincent folded his arms. Lord Voldemort is active again, he observed. As for this mark, Mr. Malfoy did not consent, did he? Malfoy trembled and nodded. Ron, standing nearby, scowled. He found that hard to believe, but he kept his opinion to himself. Dumbledore pushed his half-moon spectacles up his nose. looking intently at Malfoy's pale face before turning to Vincent. "Do you have any suggestions, Professor Vincent?" "I do," Vincent said after a moment. "Malfoy asked me to remove the mark, and I agreed." "To remove it?" Snape spun around, incredulous. "Do you know what you're proposing? That is Lord Voldemort's." "Severus," Dumbledore interrupted gently, "there is reason to trust Vincent." Snape fell silent again, staring at Dumbledore with a complicated expression. Vincent opened his briefcase and produced the purification potion. "Had this been anyone else, I wouldn't be so sure," he explained. "But this mark is new. With the purification potion and some anti-curse work, I should be able to strip it before it takes root." Snape scrutinized the golden liquid in the bottle, but the glass seemed opaque to him. He could not see through it. Dumbledore remained composed and turned to Malfoy. "Do you truly want this removed, Mr. Malfoy?" A flash of resolve passed over Malfoy's features. "Yes," he said quietly. "Very good," Dumbledore said with an encouraging smile. That decision alone meant Malfoy would not be conscripted into Voldemort's ranks, and for Dumbledore, given Lucius Malfoy's known affiliations, it was an unexpectedly welcome development. That Lucius had been involved with Voldemort made Draco's choice all the more significant. Still, whatever Malfoy's family ties, his wish to be free of the Dark Mark was the right one. "Extend your arm," Vincent told Malfoy. Malfoy did so, trying to keep his face impassive, though his arm shook uncontrollably. "It may hurt a little," Vincent warned, uncorking the bottle and tipping the golden potion onto the mark. "Ah!" Malfoy's scream tore through the office. Harry and the others shrank back. It was more than a cry of pain. The black lines on Malfoy's arm writhed as if alive, lashing against the golden liquid. Magic rippled through the room. The lights flickered, books rattled on their shelves, and the portraits on the walls stirred and gasped, some covering their ears. Dumbledore raised his wand and calmed the room. The portraits settled, and the office returned to normal. But a thick black smoke was rising from Malfoy's arm, carrying an oppressive chill. The entire office seemed to drop in temperature. Harry clutched his forehead as the scar on his temple flared. He stumbled, and Hermione reached to support him. "It's all right," Harry said, trying to steady himself. The sensation was sharp but bearable, just enough to make him pale. Vincent produced an empty crystal phial. With his wand, he guided the black smoke, coaxing it into the bottle until it swirled and condensed inside. Chapter 365. The reason Malfoy's screams echoed through the office for 2 minutes and then slowly died away. When it was over, Harry and the others sat stunned and a little numb. In Vincent's hand, the crystal vial had filled with black smoke that gleamed a strange dark green. Malfoy slumped back in the chair, a faint, burned-looking scar on his arm. "Did it work?" Harry asked softly. Vincent shook the vial. The liquid inside caught the light and shimmered with a dangerous glow. "I think so," he said, holding it up. "This is Lord Voldemort's magic, very strong." Everyone's magic had its own signature, but Voldemort's felt different. Chaotic, corrupt. Vincent suspected it had to do with the fragments of his soul. Dumbledore leaned in and regarded Malfoy's face. "How do you feel?" Malfoy touched the faint scar, exhaled, and his shoulders relaxed for the first time in a long while. He raised his arm and said, relief in his voice, "He's gone. That voice in my head, it's gone." Dumbledore nodded slowly, then turned to Vincent. "About Harry's scar." "No, it's too dangerous," Vincent interrupted. He understood Dumbledore's intent, to use a purification potion to remove any fragment of Voldemort's soul from Harry. But unless there was no alternative or a guarantee of success, Vincent wouldn't risk it. Dumbledore accepted the answer with a slight nod. Vincent then addressed Malfoy. "Now tell us the truth. Why did Voldemort give you the Dark Mark?" Malfoy's eyes flicked to Harry, Ron, and Hermione. He didn't want to say it in front of them. Vincent blinked. "You don't want them to hear?" Malfoy nodded. "Hey!" Ron protested, balling his fist. "That's not fair. We found out about this." Dumbledore raised a hand to still him. "Tonight has been eventful enough." He looked at Harry, Ron, and Hermione. "You should go back for the night. I won't press the matter further tonight." His gaze lingered on Ron. "Especially you, Ron Weasley. Hogwarts does not permit students to duel privately." Ron's ears went bright red. He opened his mouth to argue, but Hermione tugged him toward the door. "We're going back now, Professor," she said quickly, anxious not to cost Gryffindor any more points. Dumbledore gave Harry a reassuring look. Rest is what you need. Come to my office after breakfast tomorrow, and we'll speak at length. The password is lemon drop. Once the trio left, the office door closed with a soft click. Vincent set the vial of Voldemort's essence on the table and turned back to Malfoy. Now, tell us, why did the Dark Lord mark you? Malfoy swallowed. Conflict passed across his face. This is only my guess, he began, voice low. Vincent waited. A vessel, Malfoy said at last. I think the Dark Lord is looking for a vessel to hold his soul. Vincent and Dumbledore exchanged looks. Snape's expression hardened. This was far worse than any of them had expected. Go on, Vincent urged. I learned from my father that the Dark Lord gave the mark to many young people, Malfoy said with a bitter smile. I became one of them. He performed rituals on us, cast spells. I thought it was nothing at first, but recently, when I went into the restricted section, I found a book that suggested what he had done was a very evil dark arts ritual. What sort of ritual? Vincent asked. It wasn't just a mark, Malfoy said, voice trembling. It contained a preparatory ritual for grafting a soul, something that can gradually alter the body of the cursed. He wants to take our bodies. Silence fell over the office. Voldemort is screening for vessels, Vincent said slowly, thinking aloud. Perhaps he's given up trying to create a body from scratch and is instead selecting from the living. But why would a book about this magic be in Hogwarts' library? That's precisely why students mustn't wander about the library unguarded, Dumbledore said. Harmful things are here. Curiosity can be dangerous. Snape's face was dark. He'd received letters from former Death Eaters in recent months asking to meet. Now it seemed all of that might be connected. He shot a cold look at Malfoy. Did your father know what the Dark Lord intended? Malfoy shook his head. I didn't dare tell anyone. Father only knew I had the mark. He opposed it, but there was nothing he could do. Even telling him wouldn't have changed anything. He lowered his eyes. Voldemort is not someone we can stand against. Vincent remembered seeing Malfoy in the library earlier and realized the boy had probably discovered Voldemort's plan then. No wonder Malfoy had been so desperate to remove the mark. Dumbledore broke the silence. Do you know how many people he has chosen as potential vessels? Malfoy twisted the hem of his robe. At least 5. Maybe more. I don't know who they all are. And Crabbe and Goyle? Vincent asked. He'd noticed Malfoy's usual cronies had been absent. Malfoy snorted. Crabbe and Goyle? Voldemort wouldn't choose them. They can't even manage the simplest charms. Vincent's mouth twitched. If he were Voldemort, he wouldn't choose them either. Chapter 366. Reckless Malfoy told Dumbledore everything, every last detail. Right now, Dumbledore was his only hope. If that mark was still there, who knew whether Voldemort might suddenly try to possess him tomorrow? At that point, he would be completely defenseless. After listening, Dumbledore warned him, Mr. Malfoy, you will remain at Hogwarts for the time being. Do not leave the school grounds. Hogwarts will guarantee your safety. He paused, then added, if you must go out, you may only go as far as Hogsmeade, and you must inform a professor so one can accompany you. Relief flickered across Malfoy's pale features. He inclined his head slightly. I understand, Headmaster, but... He glanced at Snape. Snape gave a flat nod. I will tell Lucius that you are being detained at school for breaking school rules, he said in his usual cool tone. You will also remain here for the summer holidays. Malfoy visibly relaxed. He would not tell his father. Even though he lived at Hogwarts, Lucius might be too preoccupied with protecting himself right now. Malfoy could only hope his situation wouldn't endanger his family. By the time Harry and his friends returned to the common room, it was late. Only a scattering of students were left. Colin Creevey lay slumped in a large armchair, staring at the ceiling, still dazed. Harry's earlier attempt to comfort him had made little impression. Colin's mind seemed to be elsewhere. Hermione shot Ron a meaningful look. Ron, lost in his own thoughts, didn't notice until Hermione stomped on his foot and nodded toward Colin. He trudged over, ruffled his hair, and mumbled, Listen, Colin, I'm really sorry I broke your crystal ball. Colin continued to stare blankly at the ceiling, as if his soul had been sucked out. Harry sighed and touched his shoulder gently. Colin? Colin started, then recognized him. Oh, Harry, it's you. Ron glanced off to the side, as if he hadn't been acknowledged. I'll buy you a new crystal ball, Harry said. Diagon Alley has plenty. Don't bother, Harry. Colin forced a smile that was more like a grimace and wiped his eyes. It isn't something you can just buy. I told you, this was a damaged interrogation device. You only see things like it in the Ministry's interrogation rooms. I'll find a way, Harry said. Don't worry. Colin nodded, but the doubt in his eyes didn't entirely clear. All night, Harry and Ron talked quietly about Malfoy. Mark my words, Ron swore, voice low and fierce. Even if his dark mark's gone, he'll be expelled, and if he isn't, I'll send Snape a bottle of the strongest shampoo I can find and a whole set of hair-smoothing products. Harry fought the urge to ask what Snape had ever done to deserve that, and tried not to picture Snape with silky long hair. Best not to think about that at 2 in the morning. Still, the idea of Malfoy being expelled made him smile just a little. Malfoy had always been unbearable. Tomorrow he wouldn't have to put up with him anymore, he thought. What grounds could Hogwarts use? Treason? Serving a Dark Lord? The next morning, Malfoy sat in the Great Hall as if nothing had happened. Harry blinked in disbelief. Ron's grin froze into a mask of irritation. This is impossible, Ron hissed. How is he still here? Didn't Dumbledore? Malfoy caught their stares, met Harry's eyes for a moment, then, expressionless, lowered his head and went back to stirring his pumpkin porridge. Given what had happened last night, it seemed unlikely he was in the mood for attention. Harry and Ron weren't prepared to let him off so easily. They crossed the hall toward the Slytherin table, drawing a few glances. Something you need, Potter? Malfoy asked without looking up. You've got nerve sitting here, Ron spat. After hitching yourself to the Dark Lord. The Slytherin table went quiet. Watch your language, Weasley, someone warned. Malfoy's voice was cool. Empty threats first thing in the morning. How predictable. Show us your left arm, Malfoy, Ron challenged, lifting his chin. Let's see for ourselves whether that ugly mark's still there. Malfoy arched a pale eyebrow. To some Slytherins, the mark might once have been a badge of honor. Now that it was gone, there was nothing to prove. Still, pride didn't vanish overnight. Why would I? He said, sneering. Because you demand it? Weasley, intelligence clearly wasn't passed down with your family galleons. A ripple of laughter ran through the Slytherin table. Crabbe and Goyle laughed especially loudly. Harry felt the situation teetering. Ron was hot-headed and would not take this insult calmly. Sure enough, Ron's face went scarlet, and he lunged forward, snatching Malfoy's left arm. The move was sudden. Even Crabbe and Goyle didn't react in time. Malfoy's face shifted. He tried to wrench free, but Ron's grip was stronger than anyone expected. Let go, Malfoy began, then fell silent as Ron roughly rolled up his sleeve. There was no dark mark, just a small, faint scar, almost unnoticeable. Harry felt a rush of relief and a small, private confirmation. Vincent's potion had worked. The dark mark had been erased. Malfoy, pulling his arm back, said bitterly, Satisfied, Weasley? Or do your eyes need fixing, along with your family's falling down house? The insult ignited the table. Several Slytherins stood, rolling up their sleeves and stepping forward. Harry acted without thinking, yanking Ron away from the Slytherin table before things could get any worse. Chapter 367, Body and Soul. You were too impulsive. In the common room, Harry frowned as he watched Ron pace. Lately, Ron had taken to walking back and forth as if motion could work the worry out of him. You shouldn't have grabbed his sleeve like that, Harry said with a sigh. We all saw it last night. The dark mark on Malfoy's arm was gone. That wasn't an hallucination. What good does that do? Ron stopped abruptly. We all know Malfoy's type, a Death Eater through and through. He wiped his dark mark to save his skin. And Dumbledore is just going to let him stay? He'll rebrand that mark sooner or later. I don't deny it, Harry said after thinking for a moment. Maybe we can ask Dumbledore or Professor Vincent why he's still at Hogwarts. Yeah, right. Ron threw up his hands as if giving in to a bitter truth. Snape was a Death Eater too. He's the potions master now. That doesn't mean Malfoy isn't dangerous. Harry had no particular answer. He trusted Dumbledore and Vincent's judgment, but he couldn't swallow the fact that Malfoy hadn't been punished. They resolved to keep an eye on him. One day he'll show his true colors, Ron muttered. For the next week, Harry and Ron watched Malfoy surreptitiously. Harry asked Vincent discreetly and was told Malfoy had reformed and severed ties with the Death Eaters. Harry wasn't convinced. He thought Malfoy's belief in pure-blood superiority made him likely to return to Voldemort when the time came. March had turned the weather fickle. Outside the castle, the sky alternated between gloomy and clear, reflecting Harry's unsettled mood. This morning he woke to rain tapping the window. "Bloody weather," Ron grumbled, leaning against the cold glass. His warm breath fogged the pain. "Are we still going to track Malfoy today?" "Forget it." Harry waved a hand from his bed. A week of watching had produced nothing. Malfoy attended classes, ate, and appeared to sleep on schedule. He had at least stopped mocking them outright. That in itself was odd. Still, Harry's gut told him something was wrong. "Wait, Harry, look." Ron's shout made Harry leap up and hurry to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, he saw two figures at the base of the tower. "It's Malfoy and Professor Vincent." Harry squinted. The rain seemed to part over them, as if an invisible umbrella shielded the two. "What are they saying?" Ron pressed his nose to the window and tried to lip-read, but gave up after a couple of seconds. "I can't make out anything." "It's too far," Harry said, "but Vincent's with him, so he can't cause much trouble." Ron's face went pale. "No, we're missing something. Why did Malfoy join the Death Eaters? Maybe tomorrow he'll open the school gates and let you know who in." "Lord Voldemort isn't back yet," Harry said, rubbing his forehead. "And Hogwarts has Dumbledore. Don't be ridiculous." Meanwhile, on the empty stretch of lawn beneath Gryffindor Tower, Malfoy stood with Vincent watching intently. "Skull-inflating spell," Malfoy shouted, pointing his wand at a stone nearby. The curse struck true. A pattern like a skull appeared on the stone's surface, swelled grotesquely like a balloon, and then burst into powder with a sharp bang. Malfoy expected satisfaction, but his face was blank. He stared at the shattered stone. "Strange," he muttered. "When I cast the skull-inflating spell before, it never did that much damage." He fiddled with his wand. "Is it the wand?" Vincent shook his head. "It seems the magic Lord Voldemort used to modify your body has taken effect." "What?" Malfoy's surprise was audible. "That magic can make my spells stronger? Isn't that a good thing?" Vincent's expression hardened. "Magic isn't that simple. Everything comes at a price." Malfoy's fingers tightened on his wand. "Is there a problem?" he asked, uneasy. "Let me put it plainly," Vincent said gravely. "Voldemort's spell altered your body to make it more compatible with his soul, to make dark arts flow through you easier. That's why your magic feels stronger." He paused. "But once your body has been altered like that, your soul may no longer fit your body properly. If the changes continue, you could eventually lose your body." Malfoy went pale. Without a Horcrux, losing one's body means death. Vincent gave a short, almost sympathetic laugh. "Don't panic. That particular change seems to have faded. Your dark mark disappeared, and your soul hasn't left. For now, you're safe. And the boost in power? Yes, it's real." Malfoy let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. Relief washed over him, but then he touched his face and shivered. He couldn't shake the feeling that part of him had been altered, that his body bore traces of Voldemort. The thought made him feel strangely sick. Chapter 369, Suspension of Play. Professor Vincent had no intention of staying out in the driving rain. He had only gone to the courtyard on a whim after running into Draco Malfoy in the corridor. That chance check had uncovered a problem. Malfoy had told him that at least 5 other people had been subjected to the same physical transformation magic linked to Lord Voldemort, and at present, the identities of the others were unknown. Malfoy had said that the others had accepted Voldemort's mark voluntarily. He had not. He'd been forced. He had had no choice. Vincent could guess why. If Draco had refused the mark, Lucius Malfoy could not have kept his position among the Death Eaters. The consequences of being ostracized by a band of terrorists were obvious. Vincent walked back toward his classroom, turning Malfoy's words over in his mind. Care of magical creatures started in half an hour. Because of the downpour, the class was being held in an empty room inside the castle. He planned a short quiz, only a single sheet of parchment. His classes were mostly practical, and he'd been meaning to add more theory anyway. The course did have a theoretical exam, after all, and this would help the students' grades. Definitely for their benefit, not laziness. He reached the courtyard corridor when a soaking figure burst from the rain, nearly colliding with him. "Phew!" The man spluttered, shaking water from his hair. What on earth was Dumbledore thinking? setting the portkey here. Oh, Professor Wisen, what a coincidence. Wisen raised an eyebrow at the bedraggled Ludo Bagman. Mr. Bagman? Is something the matter? Wiping rain from his face, Bagman forced a bright smile. Professor Dumbledore needs to see me urgently, he said. I've received his summons and a portkey. Oh, it's late now. I must go. He hurried off, leaving Professor Wisen with a new unease. If Dumbledore had called Bagman, it was likely about the Triwizard Tournament. As a guiding professor, he ought to find out what was happening. He set off for the headmaster's office. At that moment, Harry and Ron, breathless from a sprint up several staircases, barreled into him and blocked his path. What's wrong? Wisen asked, looking down at the two boys. We were just coming from the common room, Ron panted. We saw Malfoy down there. He was doing something. He was out of breath from running up 8 floors. Harry, dragged along by Ron, was steadier. We saw Malfoy from the tower. He was right below. What was he doing? Is something wrong? Wisen had noticed the pair had become hypersensitive about Malfoy. Probably just a small test, he said. Don't worry too much. Malfoy is fine. Probably. Even the professor didn't entirely trust Malfoy, Harry thought. Anything else? He asked. Wisen glanced at his pocket watch. Class is starting in 2.5 minutes, gentlemen. What's next? Harry asked Ron. Potions, Ron said, and they exchanged a look before taking off in a panic. Wisen shrugged and strolled to the classroom. The students took the surprise quiz without protest. After class, Wisen headed back down the corridor with a stack of papers, wondering if he could schedule more short assessments. His plans were interrupted by raised voices ahead. He followed the sound and found Dumbledore and Ludo Bagman around a corner. Bagman was agitated and dripping. Dumbledore was composed as ever. We must put the students' safety first, Dumbledore was saying gently. But this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Bagman protested, flinging his arms. Rain flecked the stone around him. We've invested so much, and now it's the final stage. Canceling is out of the question. He fell silent when he saw Wisen approaching. What's going on? Wisen asked. Regarding the arrangements for the Triwizard Tournament, Dumbledore answered succinctly. I thought as much, Wisen said. Bagman hurried over, eager. Come and persuade your headmaster, Professor Wisen, he burst out. Dumbledore actually wants to cancel the tournament. There's only one task left. Not cancel, Ludo. Suspend, Dumbledore corrected softly. We can resume once it is safe. What's the difference? Bagman demanded, running his fingers through his wet hair. Madame Maxime and Karkaroff, he broke off. Karkaroff was still in St. Mungo's. And the ministry has invested so many galleons. They were accidents, Bagman added indignantly. He certainly did not see himself ending up like Karkaroff or Crouch. In Bagman's mind, those men had enemies among dark wizards. He'd always been honest, avoided enemies, so he could not be a target, aside from creditors. I think a suspension is sensible, Mr. Bagman, Wisen said after a moment. Look at Karkaroff, Crouch. Who will be next? Dumbledore and Madame Maxime are usually safe here at Hogwarts. That leaves only... Madame Maxime has already agreed, Dumbledore said calmly. Bagman's eyes widened. What? That's impossible. Half an hour ago, she received an urgent message from Beauxbatons. Dumbledore drew a letter from his robes, the seal of dark blue wax glinting even in the rain-darkened corridor. Their seer predicted she would face danger at Hogwarts, and that danger is very likely linked to the Triwizard Tournament. Divination? Bagman almost leapt. You're willing to believe that? I would rather prepare for the worst than risk the lives of the students, Ludo. Dumbledore's voice was soft but resolute. Bagman's Adam's apple bobbed. Then the Triwizard Cup. If the tournament doesn't finish, the goblet will be destroyed. I will find a way, Dumbledore said. For someone of his standing and power, breaking the goblet's contract would not be impossible. It would take time and care. He sounded confident, but the rain and the urgency in Bagman's tone made the reality of the decision feel very immediate. They stood there a moment longer, each man weighing safety against spectacle, the storm around them, matching the unrest growing in the hearts of those who loved the game. Chapter 370, A Change of Game and Spiders in the Forbidden Forest. No, no, no. Seeing Dumbledore's calm determination, Ludo Bagman scrambled to dissuade him. Professor, you can't seriously mean for us to stop the tournament. How can we trouble you like this? As one of the Triwizard organizers, Ludo was frantic. Every participating school had asked for the competition to be suspended. Durmstrang had already been effectively counted out. There must be other, more reasonable solutions, he insisted, face drawn. Please let me think it over, Professor Dumbledore. The tournament doesn't end until late June. We still have time. Ultimately, it's just a competition, Vincent said with a shrug. It's important, Mr. Bagman, but it isn't essential. Why this insistence? Ludo was momentarily speechless. He couldn't very well admit it was because of his debts and the goblins on his trail. Those blasted goblins were already at his door. His objections didn't change anything. If Dumbledore was determined, there was little he could do. After a heated exchange, Ludo left the corridor still refusing to accept a suspension, though his resistance was futile. Why suspend the tournament? Vincent asked, curious. It's a suspension, not a cancellation, Dumbledore corrected. While I believe a pause is the most prudent course, the suggestion actually came from Madame Maxime. Madame Maxime? Vincent's eyebrows rose. What did she have to do with it? Dumbledore nodded. Perhaps Fleur's condition isn't ideal, or as she put it, Bowden's seers have foreseen troubling omens. So that was the reason. Vincent narrowed his eyes. In the original sequence of events, Voldemort's return had been linked to the last task of the Triwizard Tournament, but Voldemort's actions had long since strayed from any script. After the incidents with Barty and Karkaroff, Vincent doubted Voldemort would follow the old plan. He had also been watching Moody's condition, and everything seemed normal. Whether the tournament took place or not shouldn't change much. Bagman isn't likely to agree to a suspension, he said, and Dumbledore agreed quietly. After all, the goblins demanding payment had even tracked Ludo to Hogwarts. Dealing with them would be no small matter. A few days later, Ludo Bagman called a short meeting with the tournament staff. The 3 champions attended as well. Vincent wasn't present, but learned the outcome from Dumbledore. The decision: the Triwizard Tournament would continue, but with important changes. Tasks would be announced in advance so the champions could prepare, and Dumbledore himself would personally review every aspect of the tournament to ensure safety. Though Dumbledore was Hogwarts' headmaster, everyone seemed willing to trust him not to favor his own school. In short, the closed-book exam had become an open-book one. Ludo Bagman was, unsurprisingly, relieved. He strode through the castle with a spring in his step after that. Preparations began in earnest. By early April, spring had arrived at Hogwarts. The lawns outside the castle were a wash of tender green, students shed heavy robes, and there was the unmistakable air of new life about the place, and, apparently, more couples than usual. Harry tried to tell himself it had nothing to do with him, but he kept finding odd gifts and snacks left on his desk by girls whose intentions were anything but innocent, which annoyed him to no end. What irritated him most was seeing Cedric and Cho Chang laughing together in the courtyard that morning, clearly on a date. That afternoon, Harry dragged Ron and Hermione out for a walk to clear his head. I say, Ron kept glancing around nervously, if we're just clearing our heads, why the bloody Forbidden Forest? Harry kicked a dead branch and grumbled, It's quiet here, isn't it? And he turned to Ron. You said you wanted to see Barty. That doesn't mean we have to come into the Forbidden Forest, Ron protested, neck bunched up. I agree with Ron, Hermione added, frowning. It's dangerous, and if we get caught, we'll lose house points. We've been here before, Harry said, waving a hand. He was more at ease in the forest now than he'd ever been. After about 10 minutes walking, Harry led them to the edge of the area where they thought Barty might be. Barty? He called, but got no reply. Looks like we'll have to go a little deeper, he said. Ron opened his mouth to object when the trees overhead shuddered. A huge black shape dropped from the canopy with a thud. Merlin's pants! Ron shrieked, scrambling backward and nearly tripping. A massive acromantula had crashed to the ground in front of them. Its 8 eyes glittered with malice, the chelicerate clicking, venom glistening on its fangs. Hermione gasped and began to raise her wand. Stupefy! Harry acted faster. Incendio! A flash burst from his wand, and a snaking jet of fire shot out, wrapping the spider in heat. The acromantula let out a shriek of pure rage and pain. Its long legs thrashed wildly before the flames reduced it to a charred black husk. Harry put his wand away with a frown. They don't usually come this far west, he said. They should be further east. Never mind that, Ron said weakly, as if his legs might give out. Let's get out of here. Hermione ignored him, staring at the scorched corpse. He's right, she said slowly. Acromantulas don't leave their territory unless something drives them out. Harry's mind jumped to Barty. If acromantulas were on the move, what if they attacked him? Then again, these spiders weren't typically a threat to people unless there were a lot of them, and unless their venom had some odd effect he couldn't imagine. They couldn't take Barty on his own, he said, unless their venom affected plants. Barty's not a plant, is he? A rustling sound came from deeper in the forest, like 100 pairs of feet skittering over dry leaves. The noise grew closer, heavier, more numerous. This, Ron's face went ashen. He pointed into the shadowy trees. Between the trunks, dozens of crimson eyes glowed and blinked as creatures moved forward. An entire colony of acromantulas, each one larger than the last, advancing from every direction. Harry swallowed. He'd never imagined seeing so many in one place. Chapter 370. Tree People. Acromantulas poured in from all directions. Ron was too terrified to speak. Hermione's hand trembled around her wand. Even Harry felt a chill run down his spine. He had never seen such a massive colony in the Forbidden Forest, never faced so many spiders at once. His friends were right behind him. He hissed to Hermione, "Protect Ron!" Ronophobia was something Harry never forgot. He raised his wand to cast a spell, but a dark shape lunged with breathtaking speed, an elite. Because Ron was standing behind him, Harry couldn't dodge and managed only a clumsy shield charm. The thin bubble barely held. More shadows surged like a tide. Boom, the earth shook. Several thick, sharp objects, like ancient roots, broke through the ground and impaled 3 of the leading spiders. Then 3 tall figures strode out of the trees. Tree people. The largest had to be Bart. He was even bigger than Harry remembered. The other 2 were a little smaller, but otherwise similar. Bart, Harry breathed. The roots that had skewered the spiders were the tree people's magic. Bart didn't waste words. He swung a thick, branch-like arm and swept 2 pouncing acromantulas 10 meters away. They hit a trunk with a sickening crunch. The other 2 tree people raised root-wrapped feet and stomped down, crushing several more into pulp. The fight became almost a massacre. The spiders' fangs and pincers did little to the thick bark, while every blow from the tree people ended a life. In minutes, the spider colony lay decimated. The tree people were thorough. When the last spider was dealt with, Bart turned toward them, a simple, honest smile carved into his wooden face. "Hello," he rumbled. Harry felt a rush of relief. This was Bart, all right. He stepped forward. What happened? Why were there so many acromantulas here? Hermione lowered her wand and pulled the pale, shaking Ron closer, watching the towering tree being with curious, wide eyes. "We're clearing them out," Bart said calmly. "Tree people need space to live. Master said spiders are useless and bring only chaos, so we're cleaning our home." Ron stared at Bart, then said with obvious relief, "Good, you'd better wipe them all out." "Master said the same thing," Bart said happily, waving a crown of branches. He turned to his companions and barked an order. They began to drag the huge spider corpses away with their roots. Harry watched them haul the bodies like trophies and couldn't help asking, "Have you finished clearing the forest? There were so many. Do you need help?" "These are the last ones," Bart replied as the other 2 stacked corpses in a corner. "The big nests are gone. Only a few small ones were hiding. Oh, and come with us. Master is in our territory." Professor Wisen being in the Forbidden Forest did not surprise Harry. Lately, half the time the professor was in his office, Harry found it hard to tell whether Wisen had been in the castle at all. They followed Bart cautiously. Ron, relieved to be out of the spider's way, relaxed a little. Travel was slow, so Bart simply carried the 3 on his shoulders. His shoulders were comfortable, softened by leafy cushions, though the faint, rank smell of spider bodies clung to the air. About 5 minutes later, they reached the edge of a small lake. A wide clearing opened before them, much larger than Harry remembered, as if the forest itself had been pushed back. The ground was flat and dark, with scattered wood chips and a few weeds. More startling, tree people of all shapes and sizes moved about, walking and working with silent purpose. They all belonged to Bart's tribe. "Is this what you meant by tree people?" Ron whispered, patting Harry's shoulder. There are more than I thought, Harry said, scanning dozens of lumbering figures. There were far more tree people here than the two he had once known. No wonder Professor Vincent was rarely in his office. Hermione leaned forward, fascinated. Are they a new species? Should they be classified as plant or animal? Bart performs photosynthesis, Harry said with a shrug. Aside from some fertilizer, they don't really eat. Hermione nodded and continued to study them. Tree people carrying huge, still-twitching acromantula bodies passed by in silence, piling their gruesome trophies in a corner of the clearing. Bart lifted his head, if a tree trunk could be said to have a head, and proudly rattled off names as if introducing his household. That's Groot. The one in the corner is Morass. The one who just passed is Sharala. They were names Bart had given his comrades. Harry asked where Professor Vincent was. Oh, you mean Master? Bart's branches shook with excitement. Master is visiting a neighbor. He'll be back soon. A neighbor. Harry glanced again at the pile of spider corpses, puzzled about which creature could be called a neighbor. His question was answered when Professor Vincent emerged a short distance away, accompanied by a centaur. At first, Harry thought it was a routine visit. Then he saw the centaur more clearly. The creature's coat was reddish-brown, mane and chest darkened with dried near-black blood. More shocking, the centaur had only his left arm. Where his right arm should have met his shoulder was a large, fresh, gaping wound. The sight made Harry's stomach drop. Chapter 3-1, Shalala Harry? Vincent looked surprised to see the three of them in the Trent enclosure. How do you have time to be here? Never mind that, Professor, Hermione interrupted, eyes fixed on the centaur's terrible wound. Mr. Centaur needs immediate treatment. Oh, it's nothing, just a minor injury. Vincent gave a small smile, then introduced, This is Ronan, a centaur who lives in the Forbidden Forest. Ronan inclined his head to the three young wizards, his expression calm as if the severe injury to his right shoulder meant nothing. Mr. Ronan, Harry blurted, don't you feel any pain? Ronan shook his head slightly. His voice was slow and melancholy. Pain is insignificant to centaurs. Actually, I cast a pain relief charm, Vincent added with a shrug. But even so, Ronan's will is far stronger than that of ordinary folk. Harry nodded. That made sense. He forced himself to ask, worried, What did you run into? Acromantulas? You guessed it. Vincent's voice was flat, as if he were talking about the weather. Those spiders were thrashing in their death throes, and Ronan got bitten on the arm by a particularly vigorous one. Acromantula venom is deadly, especially when injected straight into the bloodstream. He glanced at Ronan's mangled, severed arm. Normal antidotes didn't work. The best course was to prevent the toxin from spreading. So Ronan cut off the contaminated portion. Clean, quick, and astonishingly effective. Harry, Hermione, and Ron stood gaping. Centaurs really were grim. Can it grow back? Hermione asked, alarmed. No problem, Vincent said casually. If bones can regenerate, what's an arm? Begin now, Vincent. You said you had a way to help me. Ronan's brow tightened. The pain relief was fading. Of course. Bear with it, Ronan. Vincent's voice stayed steady. He waved toward a smaller traint in the distance and called out softly, Shalala. The name wasn't loud, but it carried clearly across the clearing. Almost instantly, a figure different from the others responded. She, by the softness of her silhouette and the tone of Vincent's voice, was smaller than Bart. Her branches curved in gentle, flowing lines. Name, Shalala. Species, willow. Trait, status, growing. Shalala had once been a willow planted near Wicca. Lately, many of the surrounding trees had developed the ability to transform and adopt various traits. Most traits were guards. Shalala was unique. She was the Trent's medic, with unusually powerful healing magic. Vincent had tested her. He'd once snapped all the legs off an acromantula, and Shalala had restored it. Ronan's injury should be nothing for her, if only Bart were not still the only Trent who could speak human language. On Vincent's command, Shalala moved with surprising lightness to Ronan's side. She extended a crystal-clear branch and hovered it over the centaur's severed limb. Harry and the others edged closer. The branch glowed, a soft, rich emerald green. Ronan grunted, his face contorting. The regeneration was agonizing. Under their eyes, the flesh at the stump began to stir. Pink granulation tissue, like tender shoots pushing through soil, wove itself together rapidly. Bone followed, then blood vessels and skin. In a dozen seconds, a complete, sturdy arm was formed, looking even more vital than before. Hermione stood stunned, her worldview crumbling. Harry felt unease, as if the healing were unnervingly potent. He'd never seen magic cause a limb to regrow. "All right, Ronan," Vincent said, satisfied. "How do you feel?" He was still cautious. It was the first time he'd used Shalala's ability on a human. Well, a centaur. Ronan didn't answer at once. He panted, sweat beading on his forehead from the pain and the exertion of the regeneration. He lifted his new arm, eyeing it with a complicated expression. The skin was smooth, the muscles full. It had a healthy, natural sheen, yet it didn't quite match his other arm. He flexed his fingers, slightly stiff but fully functional. "It's astonishing." Ronan's voice trembled. "Thank you, Vincent." "Oh, don't mention it." Vincent waved him off. "Actually, I should be thanking you. The centaurs have helped us a great deal." Ronan offered a friendly, almost awkward smile, an expression surprisingly at odds with his usual somber demeanor. Then he turned to Shalala and to Bart, making a centaur gesture of profound respect. "Thank you for your assistance, neighbors." Bart waved back. When Ronan left, Hermione couldn't hold back the question that had been on her mind. Why did Mr. Ronan come here? Centaurs usually avoid contact with wizards, don't they? "They avoid contact with wizards, but not with traints," Vincent explained. "There are dozens of traints here now, and they're expanding their territory. They've set their sights on the Acromantula's range. The centaurs came to help." Harry followed Vincent's glance to a growing pile of Acromantula corpses nearby, so many the heap was almost a small hill. "They're fresh," Vincent said, answering the look. "What?" Harry asked. Vincent pointed at the corpses. "Only fresh Acromantula bodies yield viable venom for extraction. If we act before dusk, Trents can't perform delicate extractions. We might be able to harvest what we need." He produced 3 pairs of dragonhide gloves and handed them to the trio. "And be careful." So Harry, Hermione, and Ron were drafted by Vincent into an afternoon's work, helping to process the slain Acromantulas under the forest canopy. Chapter 372, Butterbeer. Would you like some? The evening sun set the edge of the forbidden forest ablaze with orange. Harry, Ron, and Hermione trudged toward the castle, every step heavy. Collecting Acromantula venom had been brutal work. Once exposed to air for long, the venom lost potency quickly, and despite their best efforts, a large portion of it had been ruined. A day of exertion left them sore and stiff. Their backs ached and their fingers felt useless. Professor Vincent, however, hadn't let them go empty-handed. The large jar Ron carried was their reward. "We really shouldn't have gone into the forest," Ron complained. "I can hardly feel my hands." "You should be glad, Ron," Hermione said, looking back despite herself. "Think of it. This is a very large jar of high-quality Acromantula venom. That's rare. Professor Vincent is being generous. How many students get a chance like this?" "I was just saying," Ron grumbled. "But what are we supposed to do with venom? Poison Malfoy." Harry wanted to say that was a fine idea, but decided against it. "You could sell your share for galleons," Hermione suggested. "It'd be a decent sum." "How much?" Ron asked. "At least 100 galleons." "Oh, how much?" Ron's voice shot up. For a moment, he almost dropped the jar. The soreness in his arms vanished the instant gold entered his mind. Harry felt a little helpless. Ron had no idea what he was holding. "Stop teasing him, Harry," Hermione scolded. "Wait, what?" Ron's delight froze. He darted glances between Hermione and Harry. "Are you two winding me up?" Harry stifled a laugh and hurried to explain. "No, Ron, I'm not making it up. That whole jar could be worth 100 galleons or more on the black market. But," Harry added, looking uneasy, "we probably wouldn't get a single nut for it legally. Acromantulas are extremely dangerous, and their venom is tightly controlled by the Ministry. Private sale is forbidden." Ron stared at the shimmering liquid, his face a complex mix of greed and disappointment. Hermione, watching him, said, "You could ask your brothers. George and Fred might know someone." Fred and George. Ron froze, thinking of his twins and their knack for finding deals in unlikely places. They'd been to Nocturne Alley enough times. Maybe they could do something without getting the whole thing confiscated. He was still formulating the question in his head when the 3 of them reached the castle steps. The sky had gone fully dark, and students were drifting back inside. A tall figure was leaving the castle, a familiar, broad-shouldered boy from Durmstrang, Victor Krum. "Victor? Harry called. Evening. What are you doing out here? Durmstrang students usually stayed on the ship that had brought them. Crumb's mood brightened when he saw Harry and Hermione. Harry, Hermy, he started, and then, after a brief pause, added, and Ron Weasley. Ron muttered, not exactly pleased. He still felt awkward around Crumb, despite admiring him as a Quidditch player. Hello, Ron, Crumb said, ignoring the attitude. He seemed to have trouble with Hermione's name, as always. So, any news about the Triwizard Tournament? Harry asked as they stepped aside to let others pass. Crumb shook his head, then hesitated. It is about Karkaroff. They said I must go to St. Mungo's. Karkaroff? Harry blinked. He woke up? Dumbledore said so, Crumb answered evenly. Bad news, Ron muttered under his breath. Hermione gave his shin a discreet kick, and Ron yelped. Nobody said much. Karkaroff's fate was of his own making, but it was still awkward. Crumb's gaze flicked around and landed on the jar in Ron's arms. Curiosity replaced the tension. What's that? He asked. Ron instinctively pulled the jar closer to his chest, mind racing for a cover. He blurted. Butterbeer, would you like some? Crumb looked utterly unconvinced. Harry cut in before the joke could fall apart. It's venom, very precious, and very dangerous. We did Professor Vincent's extracurricular practice today, and this is the result. He carefully avoided mentioning the Forbidden Forest or acromantulas. Crumb raised an eyebrow. You use such dangerous stuff as rewards for practice? I underestimated Hogwarts. Harry half wondered if Crumb had the wrong end of the stick, but then again, using dangerous materials as rewards did feel like something only their professors would do. The next morning, Professor Vincent learned from Dumbledore that Karkaroff had briefly awakened at St. Mungo's. 2 hours later, he received word that Karkaroff had died. Vincent was not surprised. Karkaroff's fate had been mostly of his own making. It seemed Durmstrang would need to choose a new headmaster. Since Karkaroff's incident, Durmstrang had been unusually quiet. Its students seemed stranded at Hogwarts, going about their days with an odd, detached calm. Even a popular player like Crumb found himself ignored. Vincent decided it was not his place to interfere in another school's affairs. Hogwarts' responsibility was simple: keep the visitors safe and sound while they were under its roof. Chapter 373, The Crystal Ball and the Expansion of the Traint Tribe. Mid-April, and the Easter holidays had quietly arrived. It was a super long break, 2 weeks, but it wasn't nearly as relaxed as Christmas. Professors tended to assign a mountain of work, and students used the time to start preparing for finals. The library was busy throughout the holiday, and the common rooms in the houses were full of people studying or revising. Even Ron was unusually industrious in the dormitory. He usually left his homework until the last day and then hastily copied Harry's or Hermione's, but this time he'd started several days earlier. Merlin's socks, he grumbled. Professor Binns must think we don't need to sleep. What do you think, Harry? Harry? He looked across at the four-poster opposite him. Harry was staring down at something in his hands, completely absorbed and not listening. Harry! Ron raised his voice. Harry startled. What? What's wrong with Professor Binns? His History of Magic essay. He wants us to compare witch hunts in different periods. 3 full rolls of parchment. Ron waved his quill in indignation. It's impossible to finish. Absolutely impossible. How far along are you? Harry rubbed his eyes. History of Magic? Oh, that. I finished it on the first day of the holidays. Ron froze. The first day? You finished it? You're turning into Hermione. Not quite. Harry shrugged. Hermione went to ask Professor Binns for the assignments a week before the holiday and apparently finished everything the night before the break started. Ron was momentarily speechless. That familiar feeling of being out of his depth returned. These two really weren't from the same world. Still, it had its advantages. Ron quickly stood and walked over to Harry's bed. Okay, genius, since you've both finished, lend me your homework so I can copy. He cut off mid-sentence when he noticed the faintly glowing crystal ball in Harry's hand. Wait, what's that? A recording crystal ball, Harry said. Remember, Malfoy smashed Collins. I had to replace it. A crystal ball? Ron eyed it skeptically. Collins said those are hard to find. Where did you get it? How much did it cost? Harry scratched his nose sheepishly. I didn't buy it. I made it myself. When did you learn to make one of these? Ron took the crystal ball from Harry and turned it over in his hands, examining it. It looks a lot like Colin's, he said. It's not got all the bells and whistles, Harry admitted with a little regret, then tapped the crystal ball. It hummed, and the air shimmered like the surface of a pond. Ron jumped back as the image of himself from the night before sprawled on Harry's bed, snoring loudly with a suspicious drool stain at the corner of his mouth. Merlin's trousers! Ron leapt away. What on earth is going on? Don't be so dramatic, Harry said quickly. It's just last night's recording. Look, he pointed. You said you wanted to look at Hermione's potions notes last night. Then you fell asleep in less than 10 minutes. Ron flushed. So you recorded me snoring? Just testing. Harry grinned. He'd spent most of his free time on this project recently. With Vincent's help, the recording crystal ball was finally finished. It only had a playback and recording function. He hadn't been able to replicate the memory storage properties of a professional interrogation recorder. Even Vincent couldn't reproduce that. While Harry and Ron fiddled with the crystal ball back at Hogwarts, Vincent was in the Forbidden Forest with the Trents. In roughly 2 weeks, their numbers had leapt again. He estimated there were well over 100 now. All the trees around Bart had become part of his tribe. Hagrid could hardly have ignored such a large movement. When Vincent brought him to Bart's territory, Hagrid's eyes widened in disbelief at the sight of walking, living trees. What had been an ordinary stretch of forest only months ago was now a bustling Trent community. While Hagrid gaped, Bart approached with steady steps. "Hello, Hagrid," Bart greeted cheerfully. "Oh, Bart, good to see you again," Hagrid said, looking Bart over with wonder. "But have you gotten shorter?" "Bart can change his size freely," Vincent explained. "It saves a lot of resources." "That's amazing." Hagrid stepped forward and patted Bart's trunk like an old friend. "Bart belongs to Hogwarts, doesn't he?" "Bart and his tribe will always live here," Vincent said, his gaze sweeping the organized, lively Trents. "The Forbidden Forest is their home. Dumbledore has agreed." Hagrid's face broke into a huge smile. "That's wonderful. Really wonderful. If you need help with anything, come to me, Rubus Hagrid." He beamed. He adored these big, moving fellows. "Thank you," Bart replied. Just then, a heavy scraping noise came from the bushes. A very tall Trent dragged a huge, furry black carcass behind it, an acromantula. Despite repeated clearing, remnants of the giant spiders still turned up in the forest. Hagrid's smile faded. "That's just an acromantula," Vincent said with a shrug. "The forest still has them. The centaurs and Trents agree they shouldn't be here. If they keep breeding, in a few years the forest could become their domain. We're clearing them out." "What about Aragog?" Hagrid asked anxiously. Vincent knew who Aragog was, Hagrid's old pet, but the truth was painful. Aragog had been eaten by Torch as a snack last year. He couldn't bring himself to say that to Hagrid. Vincent paused, letting a note of regret soften his voice, then said, "Hagrid, I think Aragog probably died of natural causes. For an acromantula, he lived a long life." Hagrid fell quiet, the expression on his face complex. The forest was alive with the sound of the Trents going about their work, and for the moment the question of what had really happened to Aragog hung between them. Chapter 374, A New Trent. Died of old age? Hagrid swayed on his feet. He blinked through hot, watery eyes and sniffed hard. "Yes," he choked, his voice thick and nasal. "He really was very old. I should have expected it. It's just—" He wiped his face with the back of his enormous hand. "I never thought the day would actually come. He didn't suffer when he went, did he?" Vincent thought back to the day and forced a small, awkward smile. "Probably not. If anything, the old beast just got too hot and was well done. Now the spider's last warmth would be feeding some patch of earth somewhere." "Don't be sad, Hagrid," he said softly. "It's the way of nature." Hagrid nodded and tried to force a smile, though his large hand still trembled as he brushed his face. Vincent couldn't help thinking it was odd Hagrid had kept a spider as a pet, but Hagrid had only ever cared about Aragog himself. As for the descendants, they were all but gone. The acromantula in the Forbidden Forest were near extinction. This new development, Vincent thought, was far more astonishing than he'd imagined. A familiar voice spoke behind them. Vincent turned and saw Dumbledore standing a short distance away, in a dark purple robe, watching the new Trents with a thoughtful expression. Vincent had only mentioned earlier that a few Trents had appeared and were competing with the acromantula for territory. but it was clear now that it was more than just a handful. "Good morning, Professor Dumbledore," Vincent greeted. Dumbledore stepped closer and inclined his head. "So many, where did they come from?" "As far as I know, the Forbidden Forest wasn't home to creatures like these before." "They were trees in the Forbidden Forest," Vincent explained. "They've undergone a small change." "Growing limbs is no small change," Dumbledore said with a soft chuckle, then looked at Vincent more seriously. "They're our allies, then?" "The Traints will defend their home with their lives," Vincent replied. That was true. For those Trents, the Forbidden Forest was a particular locus of power. Away from it, they lost much of their potency. He had once tried to force a Trent to leave the forest. Within hours, it had reverted to an ordinary tree, and Bart had carried it back. Still, their combat ability was undeniable. They possessed a natural resistance to most magic. Ordinary spells barely affected them. Their clear weakness was fire, especially fiend fire. Anything highly flammable posed a grave danger to them. Vincent had been working on that problem. The solution he was considering was to transplant some of his firewood. The firewood naturally commanded flame, even fiend fire, in ways ordinary materials could not. Whether it could be integrated into a Trent, or whether a firewood could itself become a Trent, he did not yet know. "Reassuring news," Dumbledore said, nodding. "The Trent's arrival is timely, given how the dark forces are stirring." At that moment, a tiny Trent hopped up to Vincent's feet. It was barely a sapling, no more than a third of his height. Bart's ability to awaken trees didn't seem to care about age or size. Even saplings a few months old could become Trents, like this little one. It curled its delicate branches around Vincent's trouser leg as if for protection. Hagrid crouched down, his great bulk folding into itself, and reached a careful finger toward the childlike tree. "Oh, look at this little darling." He was about to touch it when the tender branches suddenly hardened and reshaped into several sharp thorns aimed straight at his fingertip. "Merlin's beard," Hagrid yelped. Withdrawing so fast, he sat down. The little Trent's appearance had altered utterly. Its branches gleamed cold and steel-like with a faint purple sheen, like they bore some toxic property. Terrifying, yet its behavior flipped just as suddenly. It stretched out two wooden arms toward Vincent in a pleading, childlike gesture. "You scared him, Hagrid," Vincent said, bending to scoop the sapling up. The Trent immediately relaxed. Its deadly thorns softened and coiled affectionately around his arm. "He wasn't like that just now," Hagrid said, seated and a little wounded. Dumbledore's eyes lit with interest. "He seems to trust you particularly, Professor Vincent." Vincent smiled. He'd been something of a nanny to these new saplings. He glanced down, and as he often did, a faint inner glance told him the little one's particulars. His name was Flick, species Willow, level 3, trait Scout, status growing, 3%. Flick was the only scout in the new Treant tribe and appeared connected to the medic, Shalala. Though still in infancy, his blossoms could be lethal. Those delicate branches packed a sting comparable to Vincent's devil's snare. "Shalala," Vincent called, and a taller Treant ambled over. Shalala extended a flexible branch and gently took Flick from Vincent. The little Trent snuffled and fussed like a child reluctant to leave a favored guardian. "By the way, Professor Dumbledore," Vincent asked, "what brings you into the Forbidden Forest today?" Dumbledore's gaze softened. "I have just returned from the Centaur tribe," he said calmly. "The Centaurs?" Vincent and Hagrid both leaned in. Hagrid brushed dirt from his trousers, clearly interested. "Are Firenze and the others well? I haven't seen many centaurs around lately." "They are well," Dumbledore replied with a gentle smile. "They also seem less hostile toward wizards. At least this time they didn't drive me out of their gathering." Hagrid chuckled softly. Centaurs had always been wary of wizards. Dumbledore continued, "They told me the stars have been behaving oddly in recent years. The constellations and their positions have been more chaotic than usual, so they've been watching the heavens almost constantly, trying to read what it means." "I always thought the stars' courses were fixed," Vincent said. "So did I," Dumbledore replied lightly, "but the centaurs can see the differences." Chapter 375, Joining the Competition. The Easter holiday ended in a blink, and there were still nearly 2 months until the final task of the Triwizard Tournament. Although Dumbledore would have to approve the specifics, Vincent had a strong hunch that something bad would happen in the final, of course, because of Lord Voldemort. Still, the broad outline of the contest was already taking shape. After the break, a vast maze had appeared in a clearing at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Students whispered that the maze would be the final stage. Who else would build such a pointless structure on the school grounds? The Weasley twins had even snuck in, only to find the maze half-finished. What to put inside it was giving Ludo Bagman a headache. On the last Sunday in April, he and Dumbledore stood by the outer wall, discussing plans. "The Ministry will transport a batch of somewhat dangerous magical creatures," Ludo said. "But to fill the whole maze, we'll need more. I've talked to Hagrid. He's helping me find the rest." "As long as safety can be guaranteed, Ludo," Dumbledore replied gently. "The champions must face formidable challenges, but we must never put their lives at risk." Ludo waved away the concern. "I'm afraid they won't be dangerous enough, Albus. What creature could be fiercer than a dragon? The crowd expects real spectacle." He lowered his voice. "The Department of International Magical Cooperation wants this tournament to showcase the best of British magic." Dumbledore gazed thoughtfully at the maze. It had taken much careful planning. The professors had jointly reinforced the walls so ordinary magic, even many powerful spells, would leave little mark on the surface. If a champion simply tore the maze down, the whole point would be lost. A small figure pacing near the outer wall caught his eye. Dumbledore walked over and recognized the creature. "Flick," he said softly. Ludo followed and squinted. "What is that? A tree?" The little Trent snapped around at the sound, its slender branches stiffening and darkening to a dangerous purple sheen. "Calm, little one," Dumbledore soothed, and motioned for Ludo to be still. The Trent gradually relaxed, its sharp twigs withdrawing. Vincent and Bart hurried up from not far away. "Flick!" Vincent's voice held a mild rebuke. The little Trent immediately drooped like a child who had been scolded, shuffled to Vincent's leg, and rubbed against his trousers in apology. Vincent couldn't help but smile. Mischievous but quick to own up, Flick had clearly been well trained. Ludo stared, dumbfounded. "This is Bart, the leader of the Trents," Dumbledore explained. "They're native to the Forbidden Forest." Bart inclined his great wooden head in greeting. Ludo's jaw hung open. "You've known about these. Trents," Dumbledore supplied with a smile. Bart, puzzled by the reaction, shifted a huge foot and crushed a small stone to dust. The sound of it cracking only made Ludo more excited. "How many of them are there in the forest?" he asked eagerly. Dumbledore looked to Vincent. Vincent cleared his throat. "There have been more recently. Probably several hundred. I'll try to keep their numbers in check," he added, though he knew complete control wasn't guaranteed. Trents didn't need to hunt. They could survive on photosynthesis, so they didn't unbalance the forest the way a runaway acromantula infestation could. "Several hundred?" Ludo's eyes lit up. "We can put the Trents in the maze. Albus, what do you think?" Dumbledore considered the idea, then looked to Vincent for practicalities. Vincent explained, "Their combat ability is unquestionable, and they're willing to follow orders, but getting them to cooperate costs something." "What cost?" Ludo asked. Vincent glanced at Bart and at Flick, still rubbing against his leg. "Fertilizer?" he said. "Fertilizer?" Ludo repeated, then broke into laughter. "That's too simple." He was already calculating. How many galleons would have been spent hiring dangerous creatures? If Trents could fill the maze, they wouldn't need to deploy most of the intended beasts. What a saving. "If the Trents participate, it benefits everyone," Vincent said. In the event of an accident, he could have them intervene quickly. Bart, for his part, spoke up placidly. "I am willing to help." He wouldn't go against Vincent's wishes. Ludo could barely contain himself. "We need to mark out specific zones for them to operate, maybe a special area at the center of the maze, and then—" His plans tumbled out in a rush. Dumbledore smiled and nodded. "I think it's a splendid idea." "This competition will be spectacular," Ludo declared, already thinking of pageantry and headlines. Vincent picked up Flick, who was still whining and nuzzling his hand, and handed the little Trent back to Bart. For a naughty child, a firm guardian was appropriate. Chapter 376, Extendable Ears. One morning in early May, Ludo Bagman gathered the champions to announce the details of the final round of the Triwizard Tournament. The champions would enter the maze in the order of their scores from the earlier tasks, and whoever reached the Triwizard Cup first would win the tournament. Bagman warned that many dangerous creatures lurked inside the maze and handed each champion a list of possible monsters. The list was almost useless in practice. It named dozens of magical beasts, but Harry glanced through it, recognized most of the entries, and felt oddly relieved. He dealt with far worse. One thunderbolt explosion would probably be enough for most of them, two if necessary. The other champions looked much more solemn. Crumb in particular stared at the paper with a serious, puzzled expression. On the way back to the castle, Harry couldn't help asking, "Do you think it's difficult?" "No," Crumb answered briefly. "I don't understand it." Harry had to laugh inwardly. The expression made sense now. Crumb's English was still pretty basic, enough for everyday conversation, but not for lists full of obscure creature names. They parted ways at the entrance to the Transfiguration classroom. Harry hurried in, already late. Professor McGonagall gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod and motioned for him to take his seat. She didn't need to ask where he'd come from. "What's the challenge?" Ron whispered from the next desk, leaning over. Harry told him about the maze. "I told you it was the Triwizard Tournament arena," Ron said, grinning. "See? I was right. How does it feel?" Harry considered. "Sort of ordinary." "Ordinary?" Ron looked incredulous. "A giant maze. You call it ordinary? Unless they put a few dragons in there," Harry smiled. "If they did, I could probably deal with them. I don't think it'll be a problem." "Mr. Weasley," Professor McGonagall's voice cut across the classroom like a whip. "Control your volume, please." Ron immediately shrank back into his seat and shut up. Professor McGonagall resumed her lesson on transforming a hedgehog into a blanket, demonstrating precise wand movements and minute details. The bell finally rang. Students began packing their things, and the room filled with noise. "Mr. Malfoy," McGonagall's voice called out, suddenly stern. "Please go to Professor Snape's office. He wishes to speak with you." Harry looked up instinctively. Malfoy stood, pale-faced, and left the classroom alone. Goyle and Crabbe didn't follow him. "Snape asking McGonagall to send for him must mean it's important," Ron said, watching. Harry nodded. "Let's follow and see." They exchanged a look and, taking advantage of the bustle, slipped out the back door. Malfoy strode quickly through crowded corridors, a purposeful pace that suggested urgency. To avoid being seen, Harry cast a quick disillusionment charm on both himself and Ron. Ron nearly collided with a suit of armor during the attempt, earning a muttered curse and a hasty shove from Harry. Unaware of the two tailing him, Malfoy descended the stone steps toward the dungeons and the grim door of Snape's office. As Malfoy vanished behind the door, Harry and Ron pressed up against it. Ron pressed his ear to the cold wood and grunted. "I can't hear a thing. That door's soundproof." Harry tried as well and only heard the low murmur of voices. He frowned. He should have learned some techniques for eavesdropping ages ago. Then he remembered. Fred and George had given him something odd a while back. He rummaged in his pocket, which had been quietly enlarged by an undetectable extension charm, and pulled out a pair of flesh-colored string-like devices. They looked disturbingly like dried intestines, each with a small, ball-shaped earplug on one end and a suction cup on the other. "What is that?" Ron said, wrinkling his nose. "Fred and George gave them to me," Harry whispered, and explained quickly. He placed the little ball into his ear and fitted the suction cup into the narrow crack beneath the door. The suction grab held, and the string slid out, almost disappearing into shadow. Ron mimicked him, plugging the other earpiece into his ear. Immediately, sounds that had been muffled behind the door sharpened and filled their heads as if they were in the room itself. Snape's voice came first, low and unusually grave. "Your father managed to send a message this morning, Draco." There was a tense silence. Harry could almost feel Malfoy's shoulders stiffen. What did he say?" Malfoy's voice trembled. "He hopes you will return," Snape replied smoothly. "I imagine you know why." Malfoy made a sharp, breathy sound through the devices. He knows. That person knows the Dark Mark has been." "That's not difficult," Snape cut in, cold. "Although the connection between marks has been greatly weakened for some reason, it is not entirely severed. Such a significant change, even with Dumbledore's assistance, could not be concealed forever." "What should I do?" Malfoy's panic crept into the room. Professor, my father. Lucius is, for the moment, safe, Snape said, voice steady. He told the Dark Lord that you were being specially watched by Dumbledore, closely monitored and constrained. That explains why the mark has been quiescent. The Dark Lord, while displeased, accepted the explanation for now. Outside the door, Harry and Ron exchanged a shocked, disbelieving look. Chapter 377, Discovery. A long, relieved exhale from Malfoy came through the extendable ears. Whatever he'd heard had visibly eased his nerves. After a short silence, his voice returned, this time with a note of hesitation. Professor, which side are you really on? Dumbledore's? The question was brazen. Even Harry and Ron outside the office held their breath. No, Snape answered quickly. He paused, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. And some questions, Draco, are not for you to ask. The more you know, the worse it is for you and your family. You will do as I say, keep your mouth shut, and behave as if you are being controlled. That will be enough. Now, go back. A chair scraped. The conversation was over. Harry and Ron pulled the extendable ears from their ears. When the office door opened, they were already under the disillusionment charm, crouched behind a suit of armor. Malfoy slunk out with his head down and hurried away. Only when his figure had vanished did the two of them emerge. Then they sprinted for the common room as fast as they could. Ron collapsed into an armchair, panting. Eavesdropping on Snape's office had been the most exciting thing he'd done all year, but they just overheard something far bigger. Where on earth have you two been? Hermione clapped a hand to her hip, glaring at Ron and Harry. She carried the books they'd left in class. You disappeared as soon as class finished. I asked Seamus. He said he saw you running toward the dungeons. Harry dragged Hermione into a corner, checked there was no one listening, and told her everything they'd heard. Hermione's face changed as he spoke. Malfoy's father is a subordinate of the Dark Lord, she said, and he's still working for him? That's not the point, Ron said. Snape said he's not Dumbledore's man. He told Malfoy that himself. We have to tell Dumbledore, Harry said, standing up. We need to go find him now. Snape admitted it. This is too important. Harry, wait. Hermione grabbed his arm and pushed him back into the chair. How will you tell him? You can't say you used Fred and George's extendable ears to listen in on Professor Snape's private conversation. We need proof. Harry smiled and pulled a faintly glowing crystal ball from his pocket, the recording ball. Hermione stared. You recorded it? Harry nodded. He hadn't yet returned the device to Colin. He hadn't expected to need it so soon. While they'd been listening, he'd secretly recorded the audio into the crystal ball. The whole conversation was on it. Ron's jaw dropped. Blimey, Harry, you're a genius. Let's see how Snape can deny that. When are we going to tell Dumbledore? Hermione asked. Now. Harry didn't hesitate. The longer they waited, the worse the consequences might be. He slipped the crystal ball back into his pocket, and the three hurried from the common room toward the headmaster's office on the 8th floor. They reached the statue at the top of the marble staircase and were about to answer its riddle when the statue swung aside of its own accord. I didn't even say anything, Ron muttered, bewildered, but the statue was not moving for them. Someone stepped out. A tall, thin figure in black robes, with greasy black hair and a sallow face, stood before them. Severus Snape. Harry felt the blood drain from his face. He clenched his hand around the crystal ball as if to hide it. Snape's cold gaze swept over them and paused on the bulge in Harry's pocket. Potter, he said, expressionless, give me what's in your hand. I suspect you're hiding contraband. His voice was quiet but absolute. Harry's stomach dropped. Professor, it's just a Gringotts thing. I don't want explanations, Potter. Snape cut him off, voice as chill as a blade. His hand was out, steady. Give it to me, now, or shall I make Gryffindor lose another 50 points for disobeying a professor? Harry had no choice. He handed over the crystal ball and prayed Snape wouldn't know what it was. Ron and Hermione stood frozen. Snape turned the crystal ball over in his hand, his dark eyes studying it, a faint curl at the corner of his mouth as if he expected something unpleasant. Then, under their terrified gazes, he tapped the surface twice with a knuckle. Not lightly, not heavily. The glow inside the ball stirred, and a voice spilled out. Your father managed to send a message again this morning, Draco. It was Snape's voice, clear and unmistakable. For a long instant, there was no sound but the recorded words. Harry watched Snape's face darken. The expression on it grew colder and harder as more of the recording played. At the end, the voice finished with, "Now, go back," and the chair scraped. A heavy silence followed. Harry croaked. "Can I have my crystal ball back now?" Snape's lips curved in a way that was almost a sneer. "Eavesdropping on a professor's private conversation," he said softly, like a snake. "For your outrageous and despicable invasion of privacy, Gryffindor will lose 50 points." Harry felt helpless when Professor Snape announced he was deducting 50 house points. Worse than the lost points, though, was Snape's refusal to return the recording crystal ball. Then, "What about my crystal ball?" Harry asked, bracing himself. Snape's expression darkened. "Confiscated," he said coldly. Harry's heart dropped. If the crystal ball was taken, not only would Colin be crushed, but their only evidence would vanish. He had to get word to Dumbledore. Desperation made Harry blurt out a name. "It's not mine. Professor Vincent lent it to me," he said loudly, trying to make his voice sound indignant. "You can't confiscate Professor Vincent's things." "Vincent?" Snape's brow creased, almost imperceptibly. "So what if it belonged to Vincent?" Snape's tone was laced with sarcasm. "Then let him come and tell me. I'd love to hear how he can lend out such a despicable contraption for eavesdropping and condone students using it to pry into a professor's conversations." He flicked his black robes and turned away. The crystal ball, possibly the proof they needed, was about to be taken. Harry, Ron, and Hermione watched Snape's retreating back with their hearts in their throats. Then a gentle, curious voice came from the side. Am I being summoned?" They all turned. Professor Vincent was standing there, as if he had been there the whole time, his gaze passing over the trio before settling on Snape. "Good morning, Professor Snape, and you three." Snape narrowed his eyes and scrutinized Vincent. Vincent, unruffled, treated the moment as an ordinary matter of fact. "Oh? Is that my crystal ball you're holding, Professor Snape? How did it end up in your hands?" Before Snape could answer, Vincent casually waved his hand toward the crystal ball. It slid free of Snape's grip and floated lightly into Vincent's palm. "Ah, it is mine after all." He rubbed the surface as if confirming a trivial detail. Harry remembered how much he had relied on Vincent's advice when constructing the ball. Many of the charms had been Vincent's ideas. Snape's face went even darker. Vincent had executed a wandless Accio with effortless precision, bypassing Snape's control. He had clearly become more powerful. "Wait," Vincent said as he felt the crystal ball's contents shift. "What's stored inside?" He tapped a particular spot on the crystal surface with his fingertip. "Ah, your father managed to send a message again this morning, Draco." The conversation between Snape and Malfoy played once more. Now Vincent understood why the students had come. He shrugged. "Relax, Professor Snape. I'm sure you can explain." To Harry's surprise, Snape's rigid posture slackened. "Whatever you say," he muttered, then turned and walked away with a face like stone. He just left?" Ron stammered, dumbfounded and oddly relieved. "Do the point deductions still count?" "That's not important, Hermione," Harry said, cutting off her fixation on the 50 points. He stepped in front of Vincent, earnest. "Professor, we have to give this to Dumbledore." Vincent nodded and handed the crystal ball back to Harry, then gave the headmaster's office password as if it were no trouble at all. Lemon sherbet. The gargoyle scrambled aside and the spiral staircase to the headmaster's office was revealed. "Seems our luck's in," Vincent said, nodding toward the stairs. "Go on." Harry didn't hesitate. He climbed first, with Ron and Hermione close behind. Vincent lingered at the bottom of the stairs. He had no intention of coming up. It was pointless. Dumbledore's trust in Snape was deep, and a single conversation wouldn't change that. Vincent had more pressing preparations for his Care of Magical Creatures class anyway. He watched them go. "Come in," Dumbledore's soft voice said from inside. They entered. The headmaster's office was as always. Portraits of former headmasters dozed in their frames, Fawkes preened on his perch, and Dumbledore sat behind his desk with a stack of unopened letters. But Harry noticed something small and strange, a thin, silvery white mist hanging in the warm air, dissipating quickly. It carried a familiar, comforting feeling. Patronus traces. Someone had cast a Patronus here very recently. Harry's mind went, briefly, to Snape, who had just left. No, He dismissed the thought. It was common knowledge that wizards aligned with the dark arts could not produce patronuses. Harry? Dumbledore looked pleased to see them. What a surprise at this hour. Is there anything I can do for you? Would anyone like a lemon sherbet, or perhaps a cockroach cluster? Harry set the crystal ball on the desk without wasting a second. Professor, this is very important. He leaned forward. You have to hear this, about Professor Snape. Dumbledore's blue eyes shone as he regarded the faintly glowing sphere. If I'm not mistaken, a recording crystal ball, yes? I imagine whatever is recorded inside is the reason you're all so anxious. Harry, Ron, and Hermione leaned in. Dumbledore didn't ask for explanation. He simply tapped the crystal with a fingertip. The conversation between Snape and Malfoy played again, the room filling with their voices one more time. When it finished, the recording ended. 380. Ludo Bagman's Accident. Chapter 37. Bagman's Unexpected Event. Harry held his breath, staring at Dumbledore's face, expecting to see shock, anger, or at least something serious. Instead, Dumbledore sighed softly, leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and sank into thought. Professor? Harry blurted. Did you hear that? Snape, he said he wasn't working for you, and he's in contact with Lucius Malfoy, who's working for Lord Voldemort. No one belongs to me. Dumbledore shook his head gently. And as for what Malfoy is doing, we can all anticipate it. Harry was stunned by how understated Dumbledore's reaction was. This was Severus Snape, the potions master, openly denying he served Dumbledore and apparently communicating with Death Eaters. That's it? He asked, voice trembling. Professor, you aren't going to do anything? At least, ask him about it? Dumbledore put his hands flat on the table, leaned forward, and fixed Harry with a look that seemed to see straight through him. Yes, Harry, that's it. His voice was gentle but final. Professor Severus Snape is, in my judgment, trustworthy. That is sufficient. But, no buts, Harry. Dumbledore cut him off kindly. This is my judgment after many years and many facts. And this conversation, he gestured toward the crystal ball, may seem to you like conclusive proof, but in the larger picture as I know it, it could be a necessary, seemingly dangerous move on a chessboard. Chessboard? Move? Harry didn't follow, but he knew he couldn't change Dumbledore's mind. Whatever the reasons, he trusted his headmaster. Still, he resolved to investigate for himself. All right, Professor. Dumbledore's tone relaxed. Would you like some chocolate? If it's not a cockroach cluster. What a pity, Dumbledore replied with a faint smile. Snape's confession caused no immediate upheaval. The only concrete consequence was that Gryffindor's hourglass for house points suddenly lost a large chunk. Snape's 50-point deduction remained. Hermione worked extra hard that month, and by the end of May, had made up those 50 points. June arrived quietly. With more than 2 weeks until the Triwizard Tournament and final exams looming, Hogwarts hummed with tension. Vincent was overseeing final preparations for students taking OBULs and NETs. Then, unexpectedly, something happened. After his usual visit to the Forbidden Forest to check on the train's progress, Vincent was returning to the castle. Passing the Triwizard Maze, he saw 2 figures outside it, speaking in low tones. At first, he thought they were students curious about the maze, but as he drew closer, he recognized them. Albus Dumbledore and Ludo Bagman. Help me figure something out, Albus. Bagman's anxious voice carried faintly as Vincent approached. Good afternoon, Professor Dumbledore, Mr. Bagman, Vincent said politely. Bagman, visibly distressed, started and turned. Seeing Vincent, panic flickered across his face. Then it's settled, Albus. I'll come find you later, he blurted, and hurried away. Vincent stood puzzled. What had provoked that reaction? Dumbledore watched Bagman's retreating back for a moment, then smiled at Vincent. Good afternoon, Vincent. How are things in the Forbidden Forest? The traints are growing well, Professor, Vincent answered, then added, Mr. Bagman looked troubled. Did something happen? There have been some personnel changes at the Ministry of Magic recently. Dumbledore's tone was calm. Ludo may be stepping down from his post for a time. At this critical moment? Vincent frowned. Could it have anything to do with the debts he owes? The Ministry wouldn't be worried about goblin collectors, Dumbledore sighed. Ludo may have tampered with the Triwizard Tournament prize funds. He seemed to realize he'd spoken plainly. Of course, I should not speculate. Ludo is a decent man, but his weakness for gambling leads him into unwise choices. Vincent's brow tightened. If that's true, how will the ministry handle it? Cornelius will try to keep it quiet, Dumbledore said. It's a matter of reputation. They've begun an investigation. News will follow. Vincent thought Bagman had played with fire and finally burned himself. Gambling debts could drive a man to desperate measures, but he did not worry excessively. If Bagman were clever, he'd find a way out. 3 days later, Dumbledore announced in the Great Hall that Ludo Bagman had been removed from his position as head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports at the Ministry of Magic. "This is too sudden," Madame Maxime exclaimed. "The tournament is almost upon us, and the maze is ready. Who's in charge now?" "Percy Weasley," Dumbledore replied. Vincent glanced at Percy, standing nearby. Now it made sense why he was at Hogwarts. It was extraordinary. Both departments connected to the Triwizard Tournament had lost their heads. Percy, fresh from Hogwarts himself, was now taking over. The whole competition seemed to be unraveling. Vincent half-joked to himself that perhaps the tournament had been cursed like the Defense Against the Dark Arts post. Percy straightened, bowed a little to the assembled professors, and tried for composure, but his excitement showed. "Thank you, Professor Dumbledore, and Minister Fudge, for your trust," he said, his voice betraying a bright, irrepressible pride.